After getting discharged and returning home, the young man goes straight to his computer. He starts researching everything about this new world, where his old game has become a reality. All the game's systems, like dungeons in the Tower of Trials, have also appeared. 3 years later, people seem to have adapted to living alongside their summons. But he's confident that no one will be as good at this as him, since he was number 1. So, the young man decides it's time to start and accepts the system's tutorial. Just as he thought, the young man went to a more remote place, where he wouldn't run into anyone. He needed a deserted spot, because he had no idea what kind of creature he was going to summon. The tutorial's reward is 2 low-level summoning scrolls, and that gets him excited. Holding the red items, the boy hopes his first summons will be decent. Even for him, the best player, starting with useless monsters would be a huge problem. The problem is, the game was known for having terrible odds of getting anything good. Desperate, he begs the heavens for anything that's at least a little useful. The former number 1 player doesn't even care about a high rank. He just wants a usable creature. With that in mind, he starts tearing the scroll, and a system notification appears. The young man is a little surprised by what's about to happen at this moment. As he holds the torn paper, he wonders how the creatures actually appear. Suddenly, a huge blue energy explodes from the scroll, catching the young man by surprise. He's totally shocked by the amount of power coming from such a simple item. Then, the pieces of the scroll fall to the ground, forming a glowing summoning circle. A golden message appears, saying he got an EX rank Wind Fairy. The summoner is shocked, as he didn't even know a classification like that existed. The little fairy sleepily rubs her eyes, as if she just woke up from a nap. But as she looks around, the creature seems startled by what's happening. She starts to speak, which confuses the protagonist even more because summons don't talk. The young man is silent for a moment, trying to understand what just happened. He then asks the little fairy if her name is Ramba, and she says she's a wind fairy. The creature is surprised because the only person who called her that was her master, Jinnygod. With wide eyes and a red face, she finally recognizes her former summoner. The little fairy excitedly flies to his face and hugs him, saying she missed him so much. He remembers that the little wind fairy was originally an E-rank summon, but if the player used the right mechanics and runes, she would transform completely. With that, the creature would become a divine level unit that greatly increased attack speed. However, he finds it strange because he remembers she was removed from the game in an update during the first year. The reason was that she was too unbalanced, so the young man wonders what's going on. The status screen shows she's under quarantine because of her game-breaking elements. The young man is intrigued by this quarantine status, as he never saw it in the old game. The little fairy starts to cry and says she was locked in a strange place and couldn't get out. She clings to him tightly, but the young man asks her to wait a bit and calm down. He then asks who locked her up and put her in quarantine for so long. The little creature gets nervous and tries to remember, but it seems she can't at all. Suddenly, she starts to get a bad headache and can't keep talking. With a dramatic pose, the fairy says her head hurts and that someone placed a restriction on her. The summoner doesn't fall for her act and asks her to tell him only what she can remember. She then reveals that she can't say much, but says that they were put in quarantine. The young man gets curious about the use of the plural and asks if there are other summons in the same situation. The little fairy confirms yes and says there were probably about 10 other entities with her. Upon hearing the number 10, he's completely shocked as he begins to understand the situation. He remembers the 10 summons that disappeared from the game for being considered bugs. The boy then thinks that if they all received the EX rank and were isolated, that's incredible. The little fairy says it seems they have a chance to appear whenever he tears a scroll. With that, he comes to the conclusion that he's the only one who can summon these EX rank creatures. The former player theorizes it might be a privilege for clearing the tower and tears the other item. But to his surprise, instead of a powerful being, a hairy rank gorilla is summoned. Seeing the result, he realizes the chance of getting an EX rank is completely random. As expected, the young man will need to tier as many scrolls as possible to have more chances. If he can get all the EX summons, he could become even stronger than he was before. So, He turns to the little creature and asks her to stop calling him Jinugod. The reason is that his old player name became famous worldwide because of the 5 emperors. If they find out that Jinugod is controlling the EX ranks, it could put him at a huge disadvantage. He knows that if his identity is discovered, he'll become a target of envy and jealousy. Suddenly, the environment around him starts to change in a strange and frightening way. The young man and his summons are surprised by the sudden change of scenery. The gorilla roars, and the little fairy gets scared by the environment's transformation. Then, a system screen appears, informing them they are heading to the next stage. With that, a portal opens, and the message says the beginner's dungeon has been generated. Even though he's done this countless times in the game, he feels a bit tense about the situation. He knows that reality is very different, and the dangers here are real. The young man gets very scared, and a drop of sweat runs down his tense face. But he calms down when he remembers it's just the tutorial, and he doesn't have to fight directly. With the goal of adapting to this new reality, he and his summons enter the portal. The young man keeps a serious expression as he crosses through the portal to the dungeon. Arriving on the other side, he finds himself inside a dark and somewhat sinister cave. A new system message confirms that he has successfully entered the beginner's dungeon. With everything ready, the former #1 player prepares himself, because the real battle is about to begin. The screen explains that to fight in the dungeon, you need to form a team of summons. The combat takes place between the creatures summoned by players and the dungeon monsters. The system then says the maximum is 5 summons and asks if he wants to assemble the team. Normally, players use the maximum of 5 creatures to ensure victory, but he knows that with the right strategy, taking just 2 isn't impossible. The young man is confident because he's completed this same stage thousands of times in the game. With the whole strategy already planned in his mind, he confirms the team's formation. The fairy and the gorilla are automatically summoned and prepare for the coming fight. The young man then remembers that the monster in this tutorial dungeon should be a specific one. Suddenly, a frightening growl echoes through the cave, and he goes on high alert. The system message instructs him to defeat a hungry gray wolf to escape. The opponent is an F-rank gray wolf, and the young man faces it with his eyes glowing. At that moment, a golden aura starts to emanate from his body, surprising everyone. The system informs that a protective shield has been generated around the player for safety. He realizes the game's protection system is working, but he knows reality is different. The system's warning is clear. If the shield falls and he gets hit, it's game over. Then, from the cave's shadows, the hungry gray wolf emerges with its red eyes glowing. The summoner doesn't waste time and points forward, ordering his gorilla to attack the monster. But the gorilla and the wolf just stare and roar at each other without doing anything. The young man looks dumbfounded as he realizes his summon is too slow, but he was already expecting this and calls for Ramba, who appears ready for action. The little fairy uses her wind pressure skill to increase her allies' attack speed. With that, a green aura surrounds the gorilla, who seems confused by the power he received. The big ape's eyes glow, and he seems to have suddenly received a huge power boost. He then lets out a powerful roar, showing that he's now ready for battle. The young man gives a satisfied smile, as he already knew about his little fairy's incredible power. Meanwhile, the gray wolf doesn't wait and lunges at the gorilla with everything it's got. The young man is startled by the beast's size and wonders if it was this big in the game. Even so, he believes there's no way his summon can lose this fight. Based on the data he knows, the gorilla's defeat would be something completely impossible. But he fears that reality might have variables that didn't exist in the game, and the outcome could change. And just as he feared, the wolf proves to be stronger and bites the gorilla's shoulder hard. Next, the primate is thrown violently to the ground, completely overpowered by the opponent. Seeing his monster getting beaten, the former player desperately shouts the little fairy's name. The creature complains, saying she's already waving her staff as fast as she can. On the ground, the gorilla holds the wolf's mouth with its hands to stop the attack. Using all its strength, the ape lands a powerful punch right on the monster's chin. The impact is so strong that the wolf is thrown back and lands far away on the cave floor. Seeing the opportunity, The fairy shouts that now's the time and uses her skill again. She concentrates and releases an even greater amount of magical power to strengthen her ally. With this new buff, the gorilla gets up from the ground with an even more intense green aura. He then leaps on top of the wolf, who is still dazed from the punch it took. Without giving the opponent a chance to breathe, the ape starts a sequence of powerful punches. The battle ends with a final, devastating blow that hits the wolf head-on. After the tough fight, the young man and the fairy look at the outcome with tired expressions. The wolf falls to the ground, completely defeated, while the gorilla stands exhausted in front of it. Then, the primate beats its chest and lets out a victorious roar, celebrating its achievement. The little fairy flies excitedly around the summoner, celebrating that they won the battle. With that, a system screen appears, informing him that the dungeon has been cleared and he survived. He then says goodbye to that place and is transported back to the big city. Changing scenes, we see a happy girl counting a stack of cash she just earned. This is our hero's younger sister, and she seems to have made 200,000 won today. 3 years ago, when the world changed, the young woman also got a new, very profitable profession. After her brother had an accident, she decided to become a player to help the family. On one of her explorations, she was lucky enough to get an intermediate summoner's grimoire. Because of her C-rank summon, she was able to earn a steady income by farming runes. Suddenly, her cell phone starts ringing, and she sees it's a call from her older brother. She answers and asks if he's already been discharged from the hospital where he was admitted. The young man confirms and asks if it's true she's been selling runes, which irritates her. The girl yells, saying the correct term is rune farming player, and he gets startled. The young man calms down and asks if she knows where the synthesis center is, because their dad mentioned it. His sister replies that it's obviously in the player zone that has appeared around the world. These zones were created so players could manage everything related to their summons. In these places, you can find dungeons and enhancement centers near the towers. With that, the scene changes, and we see the two siblings sitting together in a coffee shop, talking. The girl explains that in Korea, the Towers of Trials only appeared in 2 specific locations. Because of that, the player zones he's looking for are also in those same places. The young man understands it makes sense to build all the necessary facilities near the towers. Then, his sister asks what ranks his summons were, and he says they were E and F. She gets super excited because an E rank has only a 5% chance of appearing. The young man says he got lucky, but thinks to himself that he was lying to his sister. Changing the subject, he asks for her help to adapt to the system as quickly as possible. He even offers her an allowance, but she reminds him that she makes way more money than he does. The protagonist says the future is uncertain and that he could become the world's greatest player. The girl says people like that are chosen geniuses, but he gives a confident smile and questions her. He gets up and tells his sister he understands, so he just needs her to show him the way. The young man smiles and says he wants to see what a player's zone is like with his own eyes. Then, the scene changes, and we see the imposing Tower of Trials shining at night. Many people are walking around the area of the tower, which has become a meeting point. As they walk, his sister asks what he got, and he says it was a wind fairy. The girl is confused because she's never heard of that creature, and asks her brother to show her. He refuses to show her, and his sister gets annoyed with his petty attitude. The young man then proposes that she show him hers first, and the girl is surprised by the request. She accepts the challenge and tells him not to be shocked as a purple aura surrounds her. The young man is curious, wondering what she has to be so confident about. Suddenly, a C-rank shadow elf appears, floating in front of the two of them, but the protagonist doesn't seem the least bit impressed with the summon. The girl gets angry at his reaction and says C-rank summons are considered nobles, but he thinks that in reality, they're only good as fusion material, not for fighting. Then, he tries to talk to the elf and asks if she knows Korean, leaving his sister confused. The former player waves at the creature, trying to greet it to see if it responds. The young woman asks what he's doing and reminds him that summons can't talk. The young man is completely shocked by this revelation and asks if they really can't speak. At that moment, Ramba appears on his shoulder and he realizes she's been talking since they met. His sister's jaw drops, and she asks where in the world he found a talking summon. He explains that since Ramba could talk, he thought all humanoid ones could do the same. Now curious, the girl demands to see his summon, but the young man says he'll show her later. She gets furious, but he walks away, thinking it's better not to draw attention for now. The young woman calls him a cheater and runs after him, asking him to wait for her. Arriving at the player zone, the protagonist is amazed by the city lights. The place is full of people walking around with their summons everywhere, as if it were normal. His sister says that the corporations demolished the old amusement park that used to be there. The reason is that no one wanted to have fun next to that dark and scary tower anymore. But the young man thinks that would actually make everything much more exciting and fun. She finishes by saying that dungeons appeared on the site, so no one went there for fun anymore. He admits that the dungeons are scary, but seeing everything from the game in real life is exciting. Then he walks alone through the illuminated streets, feeling thrilled with the new reality. Soon, he arrives at an exchange center where players trade items like runes and summons. This reminds him of when he used to open scrolls and runes with his rich friend in the game. His sister then suggests that he go to the player headquarters academy since he's a beginner, but the young man refuses, saying he's fine because he has nothing to learn or ask. The girl gets worried about his confidence, but the young man says he'll grow on his own. With that, he thanks her for the tour and asks her to go on ahead because he's going to stay. As he walks away, his sister thinks that he's been acting very strangely lately. She decides to keep an eye on him and shouts for him not to overdo it and to call if he needs help. The young man then says goodbye with a confident smile on his face and continues on his way alone. Now in an empty hallway, he prepares to put his plan into action, away from others. He looks to both sides to make sure no one is around so he won't be seen. With the area secure, the summoner finally calls his little fairy Ramba to talk. The creature appears excitedly and shouts her master's name, happy to have been called. But the young man quickly puts a finger to her mouth, asking her to be quiet. He holds her and says that from now on, she can no longer speak when they're outside. With a serious expression, the young man reinforces that she must not speak in public at all. He explains that they can't draw attention, and she should only talk inside dungeons. With everything settled, he crouches down and thinks he needs starting capital to begin farming. He then takes out his phone to check his bank account, but he only has 12,501. The young man lets out a sigh of discouragement upon seeing his precarious financial situation. He remembers that this is his entire fortune and he can't waste time on part-time jobs. Frustrated, the young man sits on the floor, lamenting his bad luck and lack of money to start. He dismisses the idea of asking his parents for help, knowing their situation is difficult. His parents are working 3 different jobs just to keep the house afloat. Asking them for money in this situation would make him feel like a heartless animal. With this in mind, the young man is filled with determination and decides he will start from scratch. After all, the reason Jinagod was incomparable was that he was a non-spending player. Even in a game made for spending money, he managed to grow without using a single cent. He wonders if he can't do it in reality, and, with determination, promises he'll make it to the top. Suddenly, a notification appears on his phone showing a deposit of 500,000 won. The young man is totally shocked by the amount and wonders where this money came from. Then, he sees a message from his mother saying she sent the money because she heard he was going to work. With his face red with emotion, the young man is speechless as he reads the matriarch's message. He then remembers all the time she took care of him and how hard it must have been. The memory of his mother holding his hand with affection makes him even more emotional. He recalls her wish for him to wake up healthy and get well soon. With tears in his eyes, the young man silently gives thanks for his mother's love and support. With a clenched fist, he promises himself that he will succeed no matter what. His goal now is to give his whole family a life of luxury and repay them. The young man knows that others are 3 years ahead of him, and every second is precious. To become the best, he knows he has to go to the dungeons and gather materials. With that in mind, the young man buys 3 summoning scrolls to assemble his team, but to his disappointment, The first creature that appears is an F-rank slime mass. The second scroll doesn't help much either, summoning a horned butterfly of the same rank. Fortunately, the last item gives him an E-rank poisonous lizard, which is a little better. The young man feels lucky, because now he has beaten the 5% odds twice. Besides, he knows the poisonous lizard is very cost-effective for the beginning. The slime mass disgusts him, but he decides to use it for a while, and then discard it. With his 5 summons gathered, the former player believes he has enough for a team. He knows the secret to growing is to farm runes, hunt, and tier scrolls non-stop. The young man is confident he can handle the work and dreams of gathering all the EX summons. With them, he could even steamroll an S-ranked team on the 100th floor of the tower. So, his first goal is to find all the other EX ranks hidden around the world. With everything ready and the team formed, he prepares to start his journey for real. He gives a determined smile because now that the preparation is over, it's time for action. To start, the young man takes out his phone and looks for the location of the nearest dungeon. In the old game, you just had to tap the screen, but now he knows it won't be that simple. The young man wonders what it will be like in reality, and suddenly something catches his attention. Suddenly, he sees a bright light and wonders what that is in the middle of the crowd. With his phone in hand, he's shocked by the information he just found on the internet. Apparently, it's not enough to have a summon to enter a dungeon, like he thought. The portals to the dungeons appear randomly, and the difficulty varies by the energy emitted. But the rules have changed, and now even the easiest ones have restrictions for new players. With this, only officially registered players are allowed to access these locations. Defeated, the young man sits on a bench and begins to lament his terrible bad luck. He questions why he had to awaken as a player right after the law changed. Suddenly, the little fairy lands on his shoulder to try and cheer him up a bit. With a determined expression, the creature tells her master not to give up and to hang in there. The little creature's gesture manages to cheer him up, and he gives a small smile. He then thanks her for the support and gently pats her head, which makes her very happy. At that moment, his cell phone starts to ring, and the young man is a little surprised by the call. It was his sister calling from home to know where he was and if everything was okay with him. She asks what time he's coming back and what they're having for dinner, because their mom asked her. He says he'll eat alone and takes the opportunity to clear up a very important doubt with her. The former player asks if she knew that player registration comes before entering the dungeon. He accuses her of not telling him on purpose, but she swears she completely forgot about it. The girl explains that the rule is new because many people were lost and the government had to intervene. The situation was chaotic, so now they've placed staff in front of all the portals. The young man says he researched it, and the registration process seems complicated and time-consuming. He understands that if everyone becomes a player, the social system will soon collapse. Then his sister mentions that there's also a ranking system for players. The system ranks the top 100 in the country in the world, but Korea doesn't even appear on the list. The girl sighs and says that if the legendary Jinyu god appeared, the country would move up in the rankings. He ends the call and thinks for a moment about all the new information. With everything prepared for now, he decides it's best to rest and start for real tomorrow. The next day, at the young man's family home, a delicious breakfast is being prepared. His mother is cooking on the stove while his father quietly reads the newspaper at the kitchen table. The young man's father looks very serious and focused on the news he's reading in the paper. His father scolds him for being up so early, and he says he needs to leave soon. His mother offers him a rice ball, but the young man refuses, saying it's okay. He bends down to tie his shoes, preparing for the important day ahead of him. Then he turns to his parents, who are watching him from the doorway with worried expressions. With a confident smile, he thanks them and apologizes for only having shown his bad side. They are shocked by his change in attitude and watch him leave in silence. The father finds his son's behavior embarrassing, and the mother wonders if he'll be okay, but he reassures her, saying the government provides safety training for new players. Now at the registration site, the young man sees the news of losses in dungeons and becomes thoughtful. He thinks it's pathetic that so many people fall to delusions, but acknowledges that it's scary. Soon, an attendant calls him, and the former player approaches to begin his registration. He hands his application form to the woman, who confirms receipt of the document. Then the young man asks how many people can receive the player qualification in total. The attendant replies that only 50 people who pass the final test will receive the title. He gets worried because there are over 1,000 people in line waiting for the same chance. But despite the difficulty, he's confident that he'll pass without any problems. He thinks that if he couldn't pass a test like this, he wouldn't be one of the 5 emperors. Meanwhile, in a coffee shop, a man carefully analyzes the candidates' files. He complains that they're choosing too few people, and that they should be looking for more talent. Suddenly, a large explosion happens outside the building, startling everyone. The man, named Park Chang, sick yells and wonders what on earth is happening outside. Just then, a mysterious figure appears in front of him with a sinister smile on his face. A strange man accompanied by an orc and other creatures faces the headquarters judge. He accuses him of finishing off his brothers and asks if he's relaxed now. Park recognizes the man and calls him a lunatic, while glaring at him with anger and contempt. In the blink of an eye, the intruder and his summons wreck the place with their powers. Across the street in another coffee shop, the judge watches everything with his own summons. He's shocked to see the gang in the headquarters invading the place right in front of him. The young man turns around and realizes he's in the middle of a dangerous gang fight. He wonders what all of this is and how he ended up in the middle of a situation like this. The young man looks back, shocked, wondering what kind of crazy situation this is. A terrified couple hopes that Judge Park Chang sick will sort everything out. But the hero remains with a confused expression, not understanding what's happening. The gang leader smiles with a huge orc behind him, ready to attack. The judge yells that it's an emergency and can't believe they're using summons for crime. Following the judge's order, the players create shields to protect themselves from the danger. The young man also creates his barrier and calls for Ramba, who appears by his side. The little creature appears and begins to carefully analyze the situation. She almost calls him by his old name, but he quickly covers her mouth. The young man reminds her they had a promise not to talk outside. The gang leader mockingly faces the judge and calls him an apostle of justice. He then orders the orc to attack with its giant axe and threatens the judge. Hidden behind a counter, the hero decides not to get involved in the fight. He decides that for now, he'll just observe how they really fight. On the judge's side, a fire butterfly launches a powerful magic attack. The power of the attack generates a huge explosion that destroys part of the place. However, the giant orc emerges from the flames without a single apparent scratch. Seeing this, the gang leader laughs and asks if that's all they've got. Judge Park is shocked and annoyed to see that his attack didn't work. With his hand trembling nervously, he leans on the table, unable to believe what he sees. Ramba on his shoulder says the judge is trash and pulls the young man's hair. Hidden, the hero realizes the judge is at a disadvantage and might lose the fight. He gets nervous and wonders what he should do, as the situation is dangerous. Helping out here could end up dragging him into a much bigger problem than he expects. While he's thinking, the orc charges forward with its axe for a devastating attack. The judge despairs, thinking he's going to be finished before he even gets a quiet life. Then the young man appears out of nowhere behind him, and the judge yells for him to get back. But the young man says the timing of his fire turtle's skill was wrong. With that, he points to the supports behind the orc and explains the enemy's strategy. One of the monsters was using a fire resistance buff to protect the orc. That's why a fire attack with that timing wouldn't work at all. The judge then understands and remembers that the orc's body turned red with the buff. With that in mind, he summons a wooden creature to fight the opponent. The orc faces the new enemy, and the judge yells for his turtle to get ready. The fire turtle attacks, but the target isn't the orc, but its own ally. This causes an explosion of flames that completely burns the wooden creature. The judge is left speechless, as he didn't expect the strategy to work. The gang leader gets angry and wonders how the judge figured out his plan. The flaming arm of the wooden creature grabs one of the support monsters. The villain screams in despair, seeing that his plan has gone down the drain. Next, The judge's other summons advance and defeat the supports. One of the monsters is completely destroyed by the combined attack of the creatures. The protagonist watches as the gang leader's shields shatter. The judge approaches to step on him, but the villain asks him to wait a moment. Scared, the gang leader surrenders, saying he was wrong and will turn himself in. But the wooden creature's arm grabs him. Before he can do anything, he begs for his life and promises not to do anything wrong, but the judge tells him to shut up. The judge reminds him that gang members are dealt with on the spot, without mercy. The villain's eye fills with tears as he realizes the terrible fate that awaits him. Park Chang-sik stares at him with a cold gaze and asks if he understands the situation. The judge watches as the wooden creature finishes off the gang leader. Then, the civilian couple that was hiding asks if the commotion is finally over. At that, the crowd starts to celebrate the judge's victory and chant his name. The protagonist stands still in the middle of the crowd, that's celebrating the end of the fight, but he finds it very strange that everyone is happy about someone being taken down right there. The young man realizes the world has changed, and surviving here is going to be very difficult. Suddenly, Judge Park Chang-sik approaches the young man to talk to him. The man formally introduces himself and thanks him for the help he received earlier. The hero shakes his hand and says it was no big deal and that he just helped a little. Park wants to reward him, but the young man reveals that he hasn't registered at the headquarters yet. The judge is shocked, as the young man recognized a rare buff without even being registered. With that, Park asks for his ID, and the hero hands over the document without any problem. The judge says that after they check everything, he will receive his reward accordingly. With a smile, the young man says he'll leave everything in the judge's hands then. With a thoughtful expression, Park watches the boy walk away from the scene of the incident. Right after, he takes out his phone to make a very important call. On the phone, he tells someone that he just sent some data to the headquarters. Apparently, the young man's name on the ID was Baek Jinwoo, a very common name. The judge then asks the person on the phone to investigate the young man who helped him. The scene then changes, and we see the hero walking calmly on a sunny day. He then offers a cream bun he bought for little Ramba to eat. The little fairy is overjoyed with the gift and thanks her master with a smile. The young man laughs and says she's very simple and also very easy to please. He thinks it's good that she's content with little things, like a simple sweet bun. After everything, the young man thinks that nothing bad will happen to him now. He remembers the orc and thinks that he didn't want to get involved in that fight, but he knows that if he hadn't helped, everyone there could have easily been lost. Sitting on a bench, he takes a deep breath and thinks about how much the world has changed. The former player then decides he can no longer postpone his hunt for more power. His goal now is to gather scrolls and summon his next creature as quickly as possible. His priorities are a dragon mage and a trainer that he can summon soon. While he thinks about his plans, little Ramba takes a nap on the bench. Suddenly, the young man gets up and decides it's time to go, which startles the fairy. With a confident smile, he then asks if they can get started now. The scene changes, and we see Judge Park Chang-sik shocked by a phone call. He discovers that Baek Jinwoo was hospitalized for 3 years because of an accident. With this, the man understands why the young man wasn't a registered player yet. The judge remembers that during the chaotic times, accidents like that were very common. But he's shocked to learn that the young man registered right after being discharged. The application form he requested earlier confirms the boy's entire story. Park is speechless and can't believe that all of this is true. A colleague asks if he's okay, but the man says it's nothing serious. On the phone, he then decides that he will be the examiner for this month's test. He thinks that waking up and registering shows a great ability to adapt. The judge then smiles and believes that Baek Jinwoo could be an extraordinary talent. Meanwhile, the scene changes to a chick. While lit hallway in a building, we see the protagonist arriving at the registration site for the player test. Looking at the crowd, he realizes he expected the place to be packed. With a huge line, he wonders if everyone is there for the same reason. He sees the other competitors and understands that becoming a player won't be easy, but he crosses his arms and sits down confidently, as he knows more about games than all of them. Suddenly, someone starts to get on stage to begin the training. The young man notices that everyone has already gathered, and the test is about to start. Then his eyes go wide, completely shocked by who is on the stage. Park Chang-sik introduces himself as the examiner and announces the start of the training. After the written test, the judge asks if the young man was surprised to see him. The hero admits he didn't expect it, and Park says it must be fate. The man then asks how the test was and what he thought of the questions. Park explains that a question about summon combination always appears. The young man listens attentively while Ramba sleeps on his head without a care. He gets irritated when he realizes that Park used a combination that he himself created. With a smile, the young man says the test wasn't bad, and the judge is relieved. Park then reveals that he called him because of the reward he had promised. But first, the judge has a question, and the hero is curious to know what it is. Park looks at the young man seriously and asks if he was a gamer in the past. The protagonist is surprised and thinks about the term he hadn't heard in a while. He remembers that was the name given to those who played Battle of Summoners. Park says that 70% of Korean players were gamers in the past. The hero understands and admits it would be strange for him to know about buffs without having played. With the confirmation, the judge asks for how long he played, but the young man hesitates. He lies and says he played for a year, so he wouldn't be easily identified. The judge gets super excited with the answer and shakes the young man's hands vigorously. The hero is confused by the reaction, but the judge explains the reason for his excitement. He's impressed because the young man played a dead game for a whole year. The man says that most players couldn't even last half a year in that game. Then Park changes the subject and offers two types of rewards for the young man to choose from. The first is immediate registration as a player in a job at the headquarters. With this option, he would become a headquarters employee with an immediate all-access pass. The second option he has is a prize of 5 million won in cash. The young man thinks the choice is obvious, as one of the options is much better. Then, to the judge's surprise, he says he will choose the money and not the job. Park is completely shocked and speechless at the young man's decision. The hero thanks him for his concern, but says he can register on his own. He stands up and says he has no time to lose, and that he needs to find summons. Changing scenes, we see the young man with his summons in front of a portal. A female employee calls him, and he confirms he is candidate Baek Jinwoo. She explains that the practical exam is a dungeon, and he will enter the Tuesday one. As the young man prepares, Judge Park watches him from a distance. Still thoughtful, he didn't expect the young man to refuse his offer so easily. Moreover, the judge has a serious and pensive expression about something else. The scene returns to Judge Park, who analyzes the young man's test and is in shock. A professor cries with joy upon seeing the answers and says that Korea has a talent. He believes that if everything goes well, the boy could even enter the world rankings. Park then regrets not having offered better conditions to the young man. Back in the present, the employee says the young man can now enter the portal. Without wasting any time, the protagonist takes a step towards the glowing portal. He and his summons face the portal with determination and confidence. As soon as he crosses through the portal, the young man's body is enveloped in a blue light. Arriving on the other side, he and his summons prepare for whatever comes next. A system message warns that the room is full of toxic slimes. The young man shouts the fairy's name, and she says she'll stack the buffs on the gorilla. With that, the primate lets out a powerful roar as it's enveloped by a green aura. The Tuesday dungeon is a labyrinth, and the goal is to find the boss. Because of this, many beginners get lost and end up failing the test. But for the former #1 player, a simple labyrinth is no problem at all. He says the slimes are slow, and they can simply ignore the monsters. Without hesitation, the young man points to a corridor and already knows the way to the boss. The protagonist then explains that he's going to take a shortcut to get there faster. As he predicted, a system alert message informs them that the boss has appeared. With a smile, he comments that it's the first time they've seen the boss in person. Then, the enormous giant slime with a crown appears in front of everyone. With the fairy's buff, the gorilla lets out a roar and charges the boss with full force. The primate starts a sequence of powerful punches, landing a direct hit on the giant slime. With a final devastating blow, the monkey strikes the ground and creates a shockwave. Seeing the boss get taken down, he thinks, as expected, Ramba's power is ridiculous. He smiles because the fairy can give insane attack speed, even to an F rank. He then thanks his summons, who celebrate, and tells them to crush the enemies. Suddenly, a system notification says the boss has been defeated, and he's surprised. He cleared the dungeon in 5 minutes, but thinks the time is slow compared to when he was Jinyagod. But the system congratulates him for breaking the South Korean record, and he's shocked. As a reward for the achievement, he receives 3 L-grade summon scrolls. He also gets 2 low-grade abrasives, and still can't believe what happened. Shocked, he wonders if that was really the best time in South Korea to date. Changing scenes, in a control room, someone announces that the record has been updated. The man and woman are shocked by the time of 5 minutes and 32 seconds. The woman is shocked by the time and wonders if some ranker discovered a new combination, but the screen shows Baek Jinwoo's file, and she wonders who this person is. They're confused because they've never heard that name, and he doesn't seem to be a ranker. Then they realize that an unknown person broke the #1 player's record. The news reaches a meeting room, and Park Chang-sik says that Baek Jinwoo is incredible. An older man smiles and thinks that Baek Jinwoo is a true national treasure. The man slams his hand on the table and says they need to secure the young man at all costs. He decides to register Baek Jinwoo as a player immediately so he doesn't leave the country. Someone explains that records are divided into national and global categories. The Korean record was held by Kang Jun-ho, and the world record belonged to a player named Rachel. But since the rookie has already surpassed the Korean record, a test would be completely useless. The chief then says he believes that talented people should receive special treatment. Meanwhile, outside the building, the young man lets out a long, discouraged sigh. He never imagined that a time of 5 minutes would be the South Korean record. Suddenly, he hears someone calling his name in the middle of the street and is surprised. The head of the players' headquarters runs toward him, eager to meet him. The man catches up to him and says his record was incredible and asks how he did it. Jinwoo finds the compliment amusing because, to him, it was as easy as swimming is for a fish. The man then extends his hand and gives a document to the newcomer. Surprised, he finds out it's a player license and that he's already been registered. The man says he doesn't need to prove anything else, and the rookie thinks that's great. But then the older man looks curious and has one more question for the boy. He asks the young man how he managed to break the record so quickly. The former player holds his new license while thinking of a suitable answer. He knows that if he shares what he knows, South Korea's level will rise significantly. In the best-case scenario, he imagines himself rich and famous, being called Lord Jinyagod. In the worst-case scenario, he imagines being captured to have all his information extracted. So, he says the man's question was quite rude and uncalled for. The chief is a bit embarrassed by the newcomer's direct and unexpected response. With that, the man apologizes for his question, and the young man continues his train of thought. He explains that a gamer's strategy is a very sensitive and personal thing, but the man insists, saying that South Korea is desperate for new talent. The young man then sizes up the man and thinks that he doesn't seem like a bad person. He also remembers that the money was paid and that the chief seems to be a decent guy. With a smile, he thinks that maybe he can use the country to grow even faster. The former player calls the man over and suggests they talk somewhere more private. Then the scene changes, and the two appear in a very fancy and beautiful meeting room. Sitting at the table, the chief says he'll be direct and won't beat around the bush. With a serious expression, the man asks the newcomer to please help them. He explains that the headquarters needs the young man's knowledge to improve the country. The chief reveals he knows about the 3 years in the hospital, and the young man questions him about it. He apologizes and says they needed to investigate because he could have been a gang member. The hero gets annoyed and tells them to never do that again, and the man agrees, looking scared. The former player thinks that people usually get scared when the nation is mentioned, but he shows no sign of fear and knows his own worth exactly. The young man then asks what he gets for helping, and the chief is confused by the question. The chief looks embarrassed, but explains that he holds a high position at the headquarters. He says that with good results, he gets more votes, and the young man thinks he's a politician. With a clenched fist, the man begins to explain what he can offer him. He then promises to give all possible support within his authority to the young man. The hero finds the offer vague and knows that as a public servant, he can't use funds freely. With that in mind, the young man decides to make a proposal to the head of the headquarters. He says he only wants 1 month, and the man is completely confused by the request. The young man explains he'll focus on growing for a month and will ask for help when he needs it. If he's satisfied, they'll continue together, but if not, he'll return everything he received. The head of the headquarters becomes thoughtful, trying to understand the former number 1 player's proposal. He realizes the young man will make him his secretary for a month, but accepts the audacious proposal. So, the man agrees because he knows he has a lot to gain, and the two seal the deal. But before they leave, the rookie says he has one more thing to talk to him about. He then asks for the fact that he broke the record not to be spread around. The reason is that the young man is worried about his own safety, and the man is surprised. The former player is disappointed by the reaction and says it's not because of the headquarters. He knows the headquarters can protect him from a simple gang without any problem. The chief understands and agrees to block the information as much as he can, but he warns that the news might spread gradually, and the young man says that's fine. With everything settled, the young man says goodbye, and the chief says they'll see each other next time. With the deal made, he's sure the head of the headquarters will keep his mouth shut. With a smile, he decides to check the rewards he got earlier in the dungeon. He is amazed when he opens the item system's reward screen. The young man is shocked by the 3 high-grade summon scrolls he received. He thinks that, as expected, this is a great reward for a first-timer. The young man thinks about selling the items, as gambling with just 3 scrolls is risky. Suddenly, he remembers something important the head of the headquarters told him before. He recalls the player web, an app for players registered with the headquarters. The chief recommended that he use the app's color compensation station. With this in mind, the young man decides to check the item prices on the platform. But upon seeing the values listed in the app, he gets a bit confused by the prices. The boy's eyes then go wide, completely shocked by what he's seeing. He discovers that the price of 1 high-grade scroll is 3,000,001. The young man is shocked because he earned 9 million in just 5 minutes in a dungeon. With a flushed face, he starts thinking about what he can do with all that money. The young man imagines his family happy and promises they won't worry about money anymore. He then decides to sell the expensive items to buy low-grade ones and farm more. But as he looks at the market, he notices there are many low-grade scrolls for sale. The young man is confused because he doesn't understand why such a common item costs 5,001. With this question on his mind, he decides that at times like these, he needs help from someone. Without wasting time, the former player grabs his phone and makes a call to his sister, Ah-jin. She answers, and he thinks he just needs to use the Ha-jin chance to get the information. The girl explains that the reason for the high price is that the headquarters itself buys them directly. He asks why the headquarters would do that, and she says it's to support the rankers. The young woman says they buy them in large quantities with money from the people's taxes. That's why players sell directly to the headquarters without having to lower the item's price. But she warns that she heard this policy might be abolished by the government soon. The young woman says it's an old policy, and not even the headquarters needs these scrolls anymore. He then understands that the low-grade scrolls are currently in surplus on the market. The young man smiles and thinks that in that case, the head of the headquarters will be very welcome. The head of the headquarters jokes that the young man must have missed him to come back so soon. He then asks if the young man needs anything, and the young man seems a bit hesitant. The former player asks if he can get some low-grade summon scrolls. The older man wants to know the quantity, and the rookie replies that he wants as many as possible. Thoughtfully, he He remembers that 50,000 scrolls arrive every day, so it's not a problem. He says he can provide the items, but warns that reselling is forbidden, and the hero denies it. The man realizes the boy seems to have something in mind with this request. He thinks that Bak Jinwoo is different and wonders what special plan he has. Then the older man agrees to the request, but warns there is one condition. He asks in return for just one piece of useful information that could help the player's headquarters. The chief explains that as a politician, he can't give away items bought with public money. That's because if he gets caught doing it, he'll lose the people's trust forever. So if the young man provides a piece of information, he'll trade it for a number of scrolls. The hero smiles because he understands the politician won't give him anything for free, but he prefers it this way, as it means he'll be treated well if he gives a good tip. With a smile, the young man starts talking about an achievement called shaving seconds. He explains that the reward can be won again if another player breaks the record. The reward for breaking the record is 3 high-grade scrolls per dungeon, so players can take turns breaking the record by 1 second to farm items. With this, South Korea's national power increases greatly with the number of items. The man understands the strategy and says the current rankers have already received the reward, but he says that's not a problem, as many players haven't gotten the reward yet. The former player reveals that the information is the strategy for the Tuesday dungeon. With his hands clasped, the politician gets excited because that was exactly what he was thinking. The chief thinks it was the method he used, but the young man says it was from the 5 emperors. The young man guarantees that with this method, anyone can clear the dungeon in 3 minutes. But before continuing, he says they need to settle on a price for the information. He asks for the low-grade scrolls plus 50 high-grade summon scrolls. The man is shocked by the value of 150 million, but the hero thinks it's cheap. He then explains that the method can be used in high-grade dungeons worth billions. The chief agrees to the deal and promises the money if the information is good. He also promises 10,000 low-grade scrolls every day to the young man. Then the scene changes to a field where someone announces that everyone has arrived. A group of players wonders about the reason for the sudden meeting at that hour. The politician smiles and says he called them there to test something new. One of the players understands that if the chief called them, it must not be just any test. The older man asks if they know about the Tuesday dungeon record that was broken. He lies, saying he got a great strategy from abroad and that the result was good. The players are shocked and understand why the news wasn't spread. With a smirk, the head of the headquarters confirms he called them for that reason. He then announces that from now on, they will destroy the Tuesday dungeon. With that, he reveals that the key to the dungeon is a very small summoned beast. Surprised, the players recognize the creature as a spotted Komodo. A system screen explains that the spotted Komodo is a beast the size of an adult. It's sturdy with good attack and serves as a tank, being a B-grade beast. But one of the players complains that the Komodo is a failure because it's hard to raise. What most players didn't know was about a secret of the creature. The Komodo's main food is giant slimes, which is why it clears the dungeon quickly. Changing scenes, we see the players' headquarters building at dusk. A system screen shows the new record, and the players celebrate the achievement. Happily, they toss the small Komodo into the air because it's a money-making machine. A few days later, the head of the headquarters is in his office reading the news. One headline says that the Tuesday dungeon records are being shattered. Another news story praises the chief for obtaining the information, and he lets out a sigh. With this, he confirms that Bak Jinwoo has a value far beyond that of a rookie. Determined, the politician decides to create a dedicated team for the young former player. He picks up the young man's file and starts thinking about members for the new team. Looking at his desk, he chooses 3 people he thinks would be good for the team. The camera focuses on the files of the 3 players he chose for the team. Meanwhile, the young man looks at his phone, shocked by the 167 million in his account. He's shocked and wonders if making money is this easy, and if the bearded man is really this generous. Besides the money, He also looks at the system screen with a bottle in his hand. The system shows that he has 10,000 low-grade summon scrolls. With a smile, he thinks that the promise was kept and it's time to take action. So he opens the water bottle and says he's going to do his part of the deal. The young man asks the fairy Ramba if she's ready, and the little one excitedly agrees. He pours the water on the ground while the little fairy prays to all the gods and spirits. She pleads for her master to get a good summoned beast. With everything ready, the former player holds a glowing scroll and says, "Here we go." With that, he tears the item and says, this is the beginning of his long farming journey. But after a while, the young man appears exhausted on the floor, surrounded by weak little monsters. He says he opened 3,600 scrolls in 1 hour and complains about the result. His fairy then calls him an idiot and says, there's no way it would happen that easily. She explains that any X-grade beast doesn't come out easily, and he questions her luck. The little creature says that what happened to her before was just pure luck. The little fairy says that not even 100,000 scrolls would be enough to get an EX. She asks if her master really knows nothing about the summoning system. Ramba explains that there are 800 million beasts for 8 billion people, but she says the most important part is yet to come and points at him. The fairy reveals that they are in quarantine, so there's only one individual of each. Shocked, the young man holds her and asks why, but the little one doesn't know the reason either. She guarantees that the only certainty is that only he can summon the EX-grade beasts. With such a tiny chance, he understands that he needs to pull the single EX from among 800 million. Discouraged, the young man thinks it would be easier to win the lottery several times in a row. The little creature then tells him not to worry and hugs him to comfort him. She explains that the beasts no longer appear after being summoned and sold. Thus, if all 800 million caterpillars are summoned, they disappear from the game. The former player understands the logic, but still thinks it will be very difficult to achieve. He then thinks about using the medium-grade scrolls to try his luck, but the young man gives up on the idea because it's less efficient and the items are too expensive. With the low probability, he says he has no choice and continues tearing the scrolls. He then yells for the summon to appear, and the little fairy supports him from a distance. The scene then shifts to late afternoon in a random building in the city. 2 weeks later, the young man is sprawled out on his bed, yelling that he's about to collapse from exhaustion. During that time, he tore 140,000 scrolls and truly almost pushed himself past his limit. Sweat drips down his face, showing just how exhausted he really is. He even rented a room near the player zone, so he wouldn't have to depend on his parents. With that in mind, the young man gets out of bed to continue his work. The little fairy sleeps on his back, dreaming of bread, while he gets ready to leave. His destination is the Synthesis Center, which used to be a famous hotel in the city. Just like the tower, other buildings also changed their purpose to serve the players. The young man walks through the lobby, thinking about how famous the hotel's buffet used to be. To use the service, he approaches a kiosk to get his service ticket. With number 125 in hand, now all he has to do is wait for his turn. The little fairy warns him not to make any mistakes, and he confirms with a confident smile. Soon, the screen shows it's their turn, so he gets ready to enter the room. Inside, he finds a high-tech room with a magic circle on the floor. The little creature flies around excitedly and tells her master that they're going to make it. With a serious expression, the former player prepares to start the synthesis process. The system screen welcomes him and registers his wind fairy for the fusion. He then confirms the synthesis of the wind fairy by pressing the button on the screen. With that, the other summons become sacrifices, and Ramba glows intensely. The message confirms that the synthesis is complete, and the fairy emerges with a new look. Her level increased to 21, and her intelligence also went up by 2 points. He's happy but thinks that level 21 is still a bit low for so much effort. The little fairy asks if she's strong, and he says yes but thinks it's going to take a very long time. A few days pass, and the scene changes to the player headquarters building. Inside, the head of the headquarters seems to be in a very good mood while working. He asks his subordinate if the work isn't going well, and the young man agrees. The older man says he has created a team and will focus all his efforts on Jinwoo. Curious, he then asks his assistant what the young man has been up to lately. The assistant says he continues to open scrolls, and the chief is surprised by this. He adds that Jinwoo wants to use his 150 million to buy more. The assistant says he asked for a discount and that the management office is keeping an eye on him. The chief doesn't understand why. He's investing in items that have no resale value. He realizes there's something more to it and orders the items to be delivered for half the price. The subordinate is shocked by the discount, but the older man says it's special treatment. With a smile, the chief tells his assistant not to worry about the consequences. He imagines that Jinwoo could become a hero, and he will be seen as the one who supported him. With this, he sees himself being celebrated by the people, with his popularity guaranteed. With his hand on the table, he tells his assistant to just follow his orders for now. Then the politician looks out the window, pensive about the future that awaits them. The bearded man then says that this secret must be kept just between the two of them and their other allies. While the sun shines brightly in the blue sky, leaves float calmly through the open courtyard of that urban area. Sitting on the ground, the young man counts 1,558 scrolls, surrounded by piles of paper. The little fairy asks how long this will go on, and the young man replies that it'll be until they drop. Just then, someone walks calmly across the lawn, and the sound of shoes on the ground catches the duo's attention. Startled by the unfamiliar voice, the master and his helper look to the side to see who is approaching. The woman in the suit introduces herself as Yu Jile, coming directly from headquarters with a big smile on her face. She explains that she came to discuss the purchase of the summon items he requested from the politician. The protagonist scratches his head, remembering the matter, and is relieved to have received an official response. Then, the employee says they had an important meeting, taking into account the young man's recent achievements. She reveals that, as a special exception, the scrolls will be sold for half the original price. With a finger raised, the woman adds that she has another piece of very good news for the young man. But then she says that the headquarters will invest another 100 million to help with his personal development. Then, the employee asks for complete secrecy about this bonus, and the young man immediately accepts with great joy. At that moment, she states that this investment serves to strengthen the bond between the two of them in the future. Right after, the woman says goodbye with a friendly smile, as she needs to get back to her urgent work. With that, the protagonist watches the woman leave as the sun shines brightly on the city's horizon. He feels the politician's great confidence and plans to get a max level summon to repay him. But the little fairy ends up passing out from sleep amidst the torn papers while shouting her master's name. So the hero continues tearing the cards until he gets the instructor and the dragon he so desperately wants to find. The little fairy despairs upon seeing that only weak F-rank creatures are coming from these cards. He keeps trying and calls for the instructor and the dragon as the floor becomes covered in torn paper. The young man begs for good luck and rips the red paper with all his might, hoping for a miracle. Suddenly, a yellowish bolt of lightning strikes the place, and the young man falls backward, startled by the intense flash. At that moment, he realizes the effect is the same as when he got his first powerful and rare ally. The message confirms he obtained the EX-rank Dragon Mage, and a red-haired girl emerges from the flames. With that, the little fairy jumps on her master's face, crying with joy that they've finally beaten the odds. But the hero knows he can't fully relax yet and focuses his eyes on the next objective on the list. The little helper gets confused when he mentions that this is the perfect moment to use his technique. Then, he holds another glowing scroll, trusting that the tide of luck is still on his side. In that instant, the young man aggressively tears the item, shouting that he needs to keep this good streak going. The system announces that he got the training instructor, and the little fairy can hardly believe what she's seeing. Tears fall from the young man's eyes, who feels immense relief after so much hard work and mental fatigue. An imposing figure begins to form in the light, showing that the new warrior has arrived to help the team. The two new max level allies stand together, and the atmosphere becomes heavy with so much power near them. He celebrates the success of his strategy while observing the powerful duo he has just summoned. The armored warrior looks around, confused, and the system explains that he was seen as a nobody before. But the protagonist smiles because he knows this man's true value lies in something very special and unique. The instructor appears furiously, shouting that training is not a game as flames burn behind him. With his skills, he can strengthen the other allies through tough and exhausting exercises. The instructor's ability unleashes the full potential of the other summons and greatly accelerates their growth. With that, the small creature transforms into a bearded and muscular man, ready for any tough challenge. The young man is surprised by the power, and the little fairy gets scared seeing what the training can do to her. With a friendly gesture, the young man waves to his new ally, saying it's been a long time since they've seen each other. The warrior looks suspiciously at the boy, trying to recognize that voice, which now seems very familiar. Then he asks if the hero is the legendary god Jinwoo, and the master confirms with a smile on his face. At that moment, the soldier kneels with respect and says it's incredible to meet his former lord there again. Satisfied, the protagonist thinks that his servants remain exactly as he created them in the distant past. The imposing man shows total loyalty as he remains bowed before his true commander. Just then, calm footsteps are heard on the grass as the girl in red slowly approaches everyone. The mage asks if he is truly her god, and the young man is surprised that she can finally speak. The system screen shows that she is an EX, rank sorceress, and possesses an ancient dragon in her heart. With this power, she can shoot dragon-shaped waves of fire that destroy everything in her path. Additionally, she has the Devour ability, which permanently increases her damage upon defeating strong bosses. But this secret talent only works if the instructor is nearby to guide the young redhead's power. With a bright look in her eyes, the little mage says she missed her master very much during all this time. The young man gets a little embarrassed and replies that he was also eager to reunite with his powerful ally. But he asks them not to use divine terms around other people and to just call him by his regular name. With everything settled, the hero feels satisfied with the result, and the little fairy flies tiredly right behind him. Under the city's starry sky, he decides that now is the time to go home and get some well-deserved sleep. The scene changes to the young man's room the next morning, illuminated by the ceiling light. Lying in bed, the protagonist yawns, tired after the previous night's emotions. But he soon falls into a deep sleep, while his three allies sit watching over the place. The warrior comments that it's been a while since they've seen each other, and the red-haired girl agrees with a smile. Just then, the little fairy asks if she should call him by his old name, remembering they barely saw each other before. With a proud stance, the man says he was already a veteran when the helper was recruited back in the day. However, his expression changes to a somber tone as he states that he has only one important thing to say. He points his finger, stating that everyone there is very weak, and this startles the little mage. Clenching his fist, the warrior decrees that they need to train hard, even while their master rests. Then he focuses his gaze on the girl of fire, saying she will be the first to begin the training. The veteran tells her to focus on her magic energy, so she can unlock her strongest ability soon. At that moment, the soldier stares at the fairy with glowing eyes and calls her name in a scary voice. The little creature gulps and tries to hide behind the blanket, sweating from fear. He warns that the helper needs physical strength, and the fairy panics upon hearing the word training. The giant questions if she doesn't want to be useful to the boy, and the creature agrees, stuttering nervously. With that, he tells her to get a frying pan from the kitchen and do 5,000 swings to warm up her muscles. Crying in despair, the fairy extends her trembling little hand as she begs the protagonist for help. But the young man continues to sleep soundly, while the instructor drags his ally to the training area. The scene shifts to the headquarters office, where the politician is complaining about not being able to buy more scrolls. The employee explains that an official order just arrived from the director, prohibiting the sale of the items. The head of the headquarters breaks into a cold, sweat thinking about the great director's sudden decision. At this, he becomes furious because they demanded a full report on the use of the cheap scrolls. The woman in the suit deduces that a rival politician must be behind this whole mess. The bearded man complains about his enemy, while the woman warns that they won't have any more items for the hero. With this, the leader becomes tense, remembering it was almost time to make the big delivery, but suddenly, the executive's eyes widen in deep shock. He then watches his phone screen light up with an unexpected message from the protagonist. The assistant notices the bizarre reaction and questions what just happened. The older man reveals that the boy no longer needs any help with low-level summons. At that moment, the leader's gaze changes, showing a grim determination. The text thanks him for his support, and the politician finally decides to settle things with his great rival. The scene then cuts to a beautiful mountainous landscape near a famous station in the city. A sneaker steps firmly on a rock as the wind blows gently under the clear sky. The young man in the sweatshirt smiles excitedly upon finally finding a normal dungeon to explore. The virtual interface appears, explaining that there are 4 types of combat areas in the world. The panel shows daily locations focused solely on gathering specific materials throughout the week. The second location pushes warriors to the absolute limit with high rewards and totally fatal risks. Next, large flames rise on the screen to introduce the feared demonic dragon of great chaos. The giant creature breathes fire, revealing it to be a brutal challenge meant only for large teams. But the hero sets that aside and walks calmly into the darkness alongside his powerful new allies. Then he explains that the rest of the areas are the normal dungeons, and that's where he's going to enter now. Walking through the place, the young man remembers that in the past, these locations used to appear completely at random. Just then, his phone screen shows several people looking for teams, but the protagonist ignores all of it. With his own strength secured, the young man puts away his device and focuses his attention on the glowing portal. The enormous blue vortex is blocked by security tape, with a guard watching over the entrance to the site. Knowing the dangers, the hero decides to act quickly to prevent the monsters from escaping into the city. At that moment, the security guard blocks his path, warning that he needs to check the adventurer's license. Without wasting time, the boy hands over his identification document to get access right away. With the data confirmed in the system, the guard returns the card and allows the warrior to pass. Right after, he crosses the yellow tape and steps into the magical energy while receiving a good luck. An intense light covers his vision, and the master's gaze changes, showing he is ready for the battle. However, upon landing in the new setting, he breaks into a cold sweat as he feels a strange and very aggressive energy. Suddenly, several sharp spears fly in his direction, forcing a quick and very dangerous dodge. Startled, the protagonist observes warriors battling monsters and understands the style of the place. A huge horde of brutal creatures tries to invade a large fortress under a dark and tense sky. On the walls, soldiers shout orders to attack the approaching orcs. The creatures climb the stairs, and the warriors fight to survive the onslaught. The protagonist thinks in shock that in the game, this battle didn't seem so realistic. A monster fiercely attacks one of the soldiers, and the hero is frozen by the sight. One of the warriors falls injured to the ground, and his friend desperately screams for a healer. Observing the chaos, the young man wonders if this is really a true war. Then he tries to compose himself, saying he just needs to do what he's always done best. With that, the young man activates his skills, and a blue energy appears in front of him. The fairy emerges from the light and tells all her companions to get ready for the fight. At that moment, the instructor and the fire mage appear, ready for the great battle. The system confirms the summons, and the hero's main team is finally assembled. He also summons the Golden Fairy and a giant gorilla to provide support in the battle. The hero thinks there are no better summons for tanking and healing at this low level. Then the young man tells the fairy to give his warrior an attack speed buff. The master also asks the fire mage to stay in the rear, providing cover with her attacks. Next, he commands the giant gorilla to jump and go straight for the orc leader. The gorilla leaps towards the enemies, and the hero thinks this dungeon's pattern is quite simple. The creature lands in the middle of the enemy army, causing a huge explosion on the ground. The gorilla stares down the boss, and the hero thinks it's all over once the giant orc is defeated. The enormous orc raises its weapon, ready to smash the gorilla in front of it. However, the giant's attack is easily blocked, and he is completely surprised. The little fairy concentrates and uses her power to strengthen the team's main warrior. The armored instructor appears before the boss with a cold and very determined look. With a swift move, he unleashes a powerful strike that cuts through the air with its energy. His skill sweeps across the battlefield, taking down several enemies at once. After the attack, the warrior lands on the ground in an imposing pose with a menacing glare. The young man is surprised and thinks that he is on a completely different power level. Regardless, the young hero cracks a small, confident smile. Watching his allies fight, he realizes the battle will be easier than he imagined. The soldiers on the wall rejoice, wondering if they'll finally manage to survive. The giant gorilla charges forward to crush one of the orcs in its path. Meanwhile, the golden fairy uses her powers to heal the entire team. At the same time, the wind fairy taunts the enemies and deftly dodges their weapons. The hero yells for the fairy to stop playing around, and the instructor gets annoyed with an orc. The fire mage holds her staff and begins to recite a powerful spell. With her eyes glowing, she prepares to unleash a devastating attack. She unleashes her explosive dragon wave with all her magical might. The fire dragon-shaped attack advances, burning all the orcs in its path. But the orc chief survives the attack and remains standing amidst the flames. The warrior then dashes at high speed toward the remaining enemy. He delivers a final, precise blow to end the battle once and for all. With that, the monster's head goes flying, and the warrior stands still with his sword. The system announces that the dungeon has been cleared, and the little fairy celebrates the victory. The fire mage levels up to level 5, and her intelligence increases significantly. The instructor also levels up to level 5, and his critical hit rate increases by 1%. He receives an intermediate summon scroll and is shocked by the price. He decides he needs to find the next dungeon as quickly as possible. Clenching his fist, he focuses on leveling up his allies and making a lot of money. He says he's going to turn his life around with this endless dungeon grinding. The scene then shifts to a large commercial building in the city center. Inside, the politician's rival sighs warily in his office chair. A woman asks what kind of confidence he had to make such a bet. The scene changes to a meeting room where the man asks everyone to calm down. The redhead says he was just giving advice because he was overspending the budget. The bearded man gets annoyed and questions how he can call his group a talent team. The rival provokes him, saying that his talents never made it to the national selection. He implies the politician is acting this way because of the new dungeon record. The man becomes furious as he remembers the player Lim Hee-soo, who is his rival. The redhead boasts that his players get selected every year, but the bearded man decides he's not going to stand by and take the taunts anymore. He then suggests they make a bet to settle their rivalry. The rival says the national team has a limit of 10 people and proposes the bet. The politician accepts the challenge immediately with a very serious and focused look. The loser will have to resign and publicly admit that the other is superior. The assistant asks if he did this because he believed in the young rookie player. The boss crosses his fingers and says he knows the young man isn't that strong yet. He crosses his hands thoughtfully, but seems to have something more on his mind. With a determined look, he affirms that he truly believes in Jinwoo's potential. At that moment, a man runs into the room, desperately calling for the politician. The woman turns to see what's happening as her boss stands up. The employee says that the player clearing dungeons alone is actually back Jinwoo. With this, the politician and his assistant are completely shocked by the big news. The young woman can't believe a rookie is clearing the areas in under 5 minutes. Then, with a victorious smile, the boss looks at his colleague who doubted him. He celebrates and says he always knew the young man was the greatest of all time. The bearded man clenches his fist confidently, as he knew he could count on the young hero. Meanwhile, the protagonist emerges from another dungeon with a very powerful aura. The politician thinks that, as expected, his eye for talent is quite accurate. The scene then changes to the young man's room, showing some stacked boxes. Lying in bed, The young man looks at his phone and smiles at his account statement. He's overjoyed to see he's earned 16 million won. In 4 days, he worked very hard and completed 160 dungeons. With the help of his allies, the work was tough, but very rewarding in the end. All this money came from selling the scrolls he obtained in the dungeons. He then celebrates his hard-earned money, the fruit of his blood, sweat, and many tears. With that in mind, he decides he's going to separate his bank accounts right now. One account will be for living expenses, and the little fairy sleeps happily on top of it. The other will be a savings account of 10 million per month to spend on himself. He can hardly believe he went from unemployed to a player earning millions. Lastly, he opens his player account, which will be used for the hard work. In it, he has a balance of 6 million won to invest in his full power. All this money will be spent on strengthening his powerful allied summons. But he thinks the most important thing now is to increase his value as a player. His allies have passed level 30 and will need runes and upgrades soon. So he decides the best path is to farm the daily dungeons again. He goes online to see if he can find any good summons on the online market. However, the young man's eyes widen when he sees the absurd prices of the items for sale. He's shocked because the average price for a rank C summon is 20 million won. A rank B costs 200 million, and there are no rank A or S summons to buy there. The young man sighs, thinking that with a 1% chance, this is normal, but he's not fazed by this and shows a determined smile on his face. With a plan in mind, the young man picks up his phone to make a quick call. He says that's why he made a secret connection with an influential person. The scene returns to the office, and the employee rushes in, shouting for the politician. Sitting at his desk, the boss calmly asks what's going on. The young man reports that a new request from Bak Jinwoo has just arrived for them. The bearded man gets excited and grabs his assistant, asking what the request is. Then the older man picks up his phone to read the message the hero sent. The screen shows a long shopping list with summons and their high prices. The two of them are left speechless, and the boss wonders if he wants all of that. The politician complains that if headquarters bought the items, he wouldn't use weak summons. He's surprised to read that the young man will share the secret of the time attacks. The employee confirms that the offer applies to all daily dungeons, not just one. With this, the bearded man realizes the young adventurer is making a bold move. He smirks and says that for now, he understands the kid's grand proposal. With a serious look, the man decides he'll try to talk to the director about it. But he soon becomes enraged and slams the table, complaining about the old man in the back room. In a fit of rage, the boss throws the papers, and the young woman explains the request was denied. The assistant observes the scene and thinks it would be great if everyone had that kind of passion. The director told the young man to present proof or clear the dungeon before making requests. The man gets annoyed because he can't do that without the summons he asked for. He yells that it would be a huge prize if the information is true and that headquarters is foolish. Soon after, he calms down and seems very disappointed with the whole situation. The woman says that selling something so valuable for such a low price is quite disappointing. With a mysterious smile, she draws her boss's attention to a new idea. Then the young woman offers to pay for everything, leaving the two men completely stunned. The politician breaks into a cold sweat as he realizes the girl is from a very wealthy family. Yu Jiao is the granddaughter of the largest business group in all of South Korea. She had the best education, but became more interested in players than in management. From a young age, she got involved in the world of games and great adventurers, and the player who interests her most now is Bak Jinwoo for his unique knowledge. The woman admires the courage of the young man who can negotiate with the entire nation. With that in mind, she proposes creating an agency just for the promising young man. Her plan is to invest heavily and split the profits fairly between the two of them. She then asks if the bearded man is sure about such a large amount of money. The young woman jokes if he's worried about her bank account balance now. The heiress assures him that he doesn't need to worry about the money issue. With a confident look, she says she will meet with Jinwoo one more time. The woman sits at her desk, thinking about her next big move. A close-up on her face shows all her determination for the new, audacious plan. The scene changes and the protagonist arrives at a luxury restaurant for the meeting. He receives a message and is surprised by headquarters' generosity towards him. The young man is impressed, as the place is better than a 5-star hotel. He receives so much hospitality that he doesn't even know what to do with all the attention. This motivates him to continue providing them with information in the near future. The young man turns and finds Yu Jia waiting for him at the restaurant table. He remembers researching her and nearly having a heart attack with what he discovered. The young woman was a genius who entered the player headquarters with the highest scores. The young man thanks her for coming and asks if she is alone. With a smile, she replies that today's business will be handled by her alone. The young man accepts the trade with player Yu Jia by pressing the button on the virtual screen. With that, the system confirms that the transaction between the two was successfully completed. The young man bows and thanks her profusely, as it was a valuable gift for him. Then the woman takes a contract from her bag and says that now it's time for business. The name of their management company will be Ubek, a very simple and direct name. She explains that the name comes from combining their surnames and divides the company's shares. She then reveals that 5% of the shares will go to the politician as a bonus. The young woman also plans to hire 2 employees who left headquarters that morning, but the protagonist is a bit hesitant about the terms of the generous contract. He asks if she's sure about giving him 70% of the entire company. The heiress says that in return, she will take a solid 25%, but she states that she has the ability to maximize the value of her share in the business. Then the woman says that now is the time to set aside greed and strengthen their bond. With everything settled, the young man seals the contract with his thumbprint on the paper. The message confirms that the deal has been closed, and the young woman smiles, very satisfied. The two shake hands, and the young man says he will be in the care of the new director. Suddenly, the armored instructor looks to the side, surprised by something. He notices a bright light shining in the middle of the forest and goes on high alert. The master and the woman also look at the light, wondering what it is. At that moment, a shrill scream echoes through the forest, startling everyone there. The warrior then runs toward the sound to see what's happening. He activates auto hunt and holds a girl upside down by her feet. The young man is shocked to see the girl is Baeka Jean and asks what she's doing there. With the situation a bit calmer, he sits down to talk with the girl. The pink-haired girl kneels on the ground with some leaves in her hair. The young man asks if she recognized the director and followed her because she's a big fan. The girl denies it and gets a smack on the head, as that's still considered following. Then, upon seeing the young man there, she started spying on their conversation from a distance. The girl gets angry and yells that he caught her and that she takes the blame, but she grabs him and asks how he knows the famous heiress Yu Jia. The young man thinks the situation is getting very complicated with so many questions. The director remembers that there's a family clause in the contract for new allies. The girl keeps shouting for him to tell her everything without a second thought. Seeing she's getting nowhere, she sighs and uses eye drops to fake it. Then the girl says she'll tell the truth, and the scene changes to a sunny sky. She reveals that she used to be a famous player and broke a dungeon record. The young man adds that he met the director because of that same matter. The girl becomes thoughtful and doesn't seem to quite believe their story. He remembers she used to play a mobile game a lot and asks if it was that one. The young man says no and that he's been playing Summoner's Battle for a year, but can't reveal himself. The young man accepts the trade with player Yu Jia by pressing the button on the virtual screen. With that, the system confirms that the transaction between the two was successfully completed. The young man bows and thanks her profusely, as it was a valuable gift for him. Then the woman takes a contract from her bag and says that now it's time for business. The name of their management company will be Ubek, a very simple and direct name. She explains that the name comes from combining their surnames and divides the company's shares. She then reveals that 5% of the shares will go to the politician as a bonus. The young woman also plans to hire 2 employees who left headquarters that morning, but the protagonist is a bit hesitant about the terms of the generous contract. He asks if she's sure about giving him 70% of the entire company. The Hera says that in return, she will take a solid 25%, but she states that she has the ability to maximize the value of her share in the business. Then the woman says that now is the time to set aside greed and strengthen their bond. With everything settled, the young man seals the contract with his thumbprint on the paper. The message confirms that the deal has been closed, and the young woman smiles, very satisfied. The two shake hands, and the young man says he will be in the care of the new director. Suddenly, the armored instructor looks to the side, surprised by something. He notices a bright light shining in the middle of the forest, and goes on high alert. The master and the woman also look at the light, wondering what it is. At that moment, a shrill scream echoes through the forest, startling everyone there. The warrior then runs toward the sound to see what's happening. He activates auto hunt and holds a girl upside down by her feet. The young man is shocked to see the girl is Baek-A Jean and asks what she's doing there. With the situation a bit calmer, he sits down to talk with the girl. The pink-haired girl kneels on the ground with some leaves in her hair. The young man asks if she recognized the director and followed her because she's a big fan. The girl denies it and gets a smack on the head, as that's still considered following. Then, upon seeing the young man there, she started spying on their conversation from a distance. The girl gets angry and yells that he caught her and that she takes the blame, but she grabs him and asks how he knows the famous Harris Yu Jaya. The young man thinks the situation is getting very complicated with so many questions. The director remembers that there's a family clause in the contract for new allies. The girl keeps shouting for him to tell her everything without a second thought. Seeing she's getting nowhere, she sighs and uses eye drops to fake it. Then the girl says she'll tell the truth, and the scene changes to a sunny sky. She reveals that she used to be a famous player and broke a dungeon record. The young man adds that he met the director because of that same matter. The girl becomes thoughtful and doesn't seem to quite believe their story. He remembers she used to play a mobile game a lot and asks if it was that one. The young man says no, and that he's been playing Summoner's Battle for a year, but can't reveal himself. The girl gets excited and says that a year is a long time to play that trash game. With a smile, she jokes that his gaming obsession finally paid off. The young man thinks he doesn't distrust her, but her forced smile makes him a bit tense. However, he remembers when he was in the hospital and the risk he faced in the past. His family took care of him for 3 years, and he can't put them in danger now. With that in mind, the young man decides he needs to get strong to protect his family. The girl questions him, and he asks her not to tell their parents for now. He says he has his reasons, and the girl agrees while his allies train hard. The training seems to be very tough, and the fire mage trembles in fear of the instructor. The young man asks about the shadow elf, and the girl wants to know why she's like that. He explains that without the shadow wolf, the elf's combat efficiency drops significantly. Surprised, she asked if such a summon exists, and he says it's a rank B. The young man searches on his phone, but complains that he can't find the item he wants. At this, the pink-haired girl also searches on her phone to help. With a serious expression, the sister calls her dear brother over for a chat. She shows him the rank B shadow wolf for sale for 500 million won. With a smile, he tells her to wait and that he'll get it in just 1 month. The girl gets excited but then becomes suspicious, as 500 million is a lot of money. She teases him, telling him to forget it because she'll save up and buy it herself. With a confident look, the young man just gazes at the horizon with a smirk. He tells her not to cry when he hands her the item, and the girl is surprised. The adventurer ends the training session, and the sister feels that something is very strange. The girl holds the elf and notices that the intimidating creature has changed completely. A week later, the hero is in the player zone with his new support team. The employee smiles and hands him a vest that he will wear in the daily dungeons. They help him put it on and explain that the company's first product is information. The strategy is to sell dungeon clear videos for a premium price, and that's what the new high-tech equipment he received is for. The equipment records everything around him in 3 dimensions and with great detail. He tries on the item and notes that it's light and flexible, so it won't interfere with the fight. The team gets ready with goggles and equipment to start recording soon. Seeing everyone ready, he feels that the recording is more stressful than the dungeon itself. The adventurer says it's his first time here and can't guarantee a clean run. The young woman smiles and says it's no problem, because they will edit the best parts. He thanks her and turns to the red portal with a new expression on his face. With a smile, he asks if he can break the national record right off the bat. The director is surprised, as he had just said it wouldn't be perfect. She tells him to relax and go at his own pace, like in his gamer days. With that, the young man confidently walks toward the red energy portal. The record is 7 minutes, and the young man smiles, knowing he'll beat it easily. The hero arrives at the Monday dungeon, a dark place with swords scattered on the ground. The system announces that this is the only place that grants attack-type runes. The time it takes to clear the area determines the ranking, and attack runes are crucial. This is a defense dungeon, where you normally hold out against hordes for 30 minutes. With that, a huge horde of skeletons advances towards the great adventurer. But there is a world ranking, which is why the clear time is so important. The place is a defense dungeon in name only, as it's all over once the Lich boss is defeated. With that, he activates his vest and confirms that the recording equipment is working perfectly. The young man faces the challenge with a serious expression as the system activates. The screen shows that a player can configure up to 3 teams for battles. The young man smiles as he has already set up teams for PvP and for the daily dungeons. With that, he summons the combat sheriff, the instructor, and the gorilla to the front line. Immediately after, he summons the priest and the golden fairy for team support. The system warns of the Legion of the Undead, and the young man prepares to fight. The team takes their positions, and the 30-minute timer begins its countdown. With time ticking, the undead creatures advance for the big attack. The gorilla roars in fury as the small skeletons leap onto it. Without wasting time, the giant creature grabs one of the enemies with its huge hand. With a powerful blow, it crushes the small enemy with all its great strength. The remains of the enemy are left on the ground, and the young man says it's now time to advance. The hero extends his hand and sends his team forward to the next challenge of the dungeon. The great lich floats above its army of skeletons with a dark aura. The hero's team faces the challenge while some enemies are already down on the ground. The young man says they first need to get into position, and the instructor looks at him, surprised. The warrior understands the plan and says they will move to higher, safer ground. They run, and the master thinks that his ally held back because of the recording. With time running out, the young man prepares for the next phase of the grand plan. With a focused look, he calculates that it took them 2 minutes to get there. The priest in white deals with some skeletons that were following the group. The instructor also springs into action and destroys one of the enemies with his sword. The giant gorilla crushes a monster's skull with its huge, strong hands. With a roar of fury, the creature shows all its strength to the enemies. The combat sheriff also joins the fight and attacks the skeletons with agility. The protagonist is happy because his allies are doing very well in the battle. Then the young man faces the great lich waiting for them at the top of the hill. He gives the order for the combat sheriff to prepare for the main attack. This summon has long range and precision, but its damage was very low before. In the past, players complained that it couldn't even catch a weak fish. But in this low-level dungeon, they're perfect because the lich has low HP. The young man asks the shooter not to fire yet, as he needs some prep time. He then tells the priest to cast his shine and blessing spells on their ally. With that, the sheriff's weapon glows with a golden and very powerful energy. The system explains that the blessing removes the lich's dark shield against attacks. With the enemy's defense broken, the young man says now is the time to strike. He orders them to open fire, and the sheriff aims his sniper rifle at the great boss. The instructor also prepares to attack with all his strength and full power. The gorilla leaps toward the enemies, while the warrior fights on the ground. The creature lands with a powerful impact, destroying several skeletons there. He rises amidst the enemies, ready to continue the fierce battle. But the creature ends up being hit by several magical attacks from the skeletons. The fairy and the priest use their healing spells to recover their injured ally. The two healers concentrate on keeping the front lines standing and strong. Meanwhile, the combat sheriff reloads his weapon to continue the attacks. The young man sighs, a bit disappointed with the result of his strategy. He finds the shooter's damage pathetic, and the lich barely feels the shots it's taking. But the boss's health is slowly decreasing with the continuous attacks. The lich gets annoyed by the weak but constant attacks it's suffering now. The master thinks that normally this would take a long time because of the weak runes. The gorilla is healed, and the young man understands why sheriffs are seen as inefficient. Suddenly, one of the skeletons manages to jump onto the large creature's back, but the gorilla grabs the enemy with its hand before it can do anything. One of the skeletons screams as it advances to attack the large group of heroes. The protagonist faces the enemies with a calm and very confident look of victory, but he says this inefficiency only applies to ordinary players and gets ready. A skeleton tries to attack the young man, but the instructor defends the blow with his sword. The young hero explains that he has his best warrior to protect him in combat. With its potential unlocked in the right runes, the sheriff prepares for a shot. A single powerful blue shot is fired towards the great dungeon boss. The lich is hit squarely by the attack and falls to the ground, completely defeated. With the boss destroyed, the rest of its skeleton army kneels on the ground. The system announces that the boss has been defeated and the dungeon was cleared in 4 minutes. With this, he breaks the South Korean record and unlocks a special achievement. The director's team looks at the scoreboard and thinks it's too early for a time attack. The young woman says it's only been a week and that she would have supported him, even if he failed to break the record. One of the employees agrees, but seems a little worried about the outcome. He asks if the young man is really going to break all the daily records as he promised. The employee remembers that he didn't explain how he would clear the other dungeons. He fears it might be a bluff, as there are many veteran players in the country. The director notices his concern and asks if he's afraid of failure. The young man is startled by the question, but can't hide his complete nervousness. The woman then says that this is a business. She started with her own money. She assures them that even if things go wrong, she'll take care of the careers of the two who trusted her. The employees see her as an angel and think this is their dream job. With that, the two embrace and promise to dedicate their lives to the new company, Ubek. The director thinks confidently that she has the power to make all of this happen. She remembers the young man and his fairy and feels that he's hiding something much stronger. In a flashback, she recalls the young man's confidence when he asked about the record. The young woman thinks that he acts as if this dungeon is absolutely nothing special. Suddenly, one of the employees shouts that the dungeon's record has been broken. A man asks which record, and the panel shows the time for the Monday dungeon. In a control room, an operator is shocked by the 3-minute reduction in time. The system shows that the new record holder is the young adventurer Bak Jinwoo. The men in the room are impressed by the feat and look at the new ranking on the big screen. The director's team also can't believe he managed it on his first try. The woman trembles a little and looks at her hand, feeling that this is the right moment. She then clenches her fist with determination, thinking about her new great business. With a confident smile, the young woman thinks that at the very least, it will be a moderate success. If everything goes well, she knows her new venture will be an absolute success. The young man and his allies look out over the horizon of the newly conquered dungeon. With the job done, an energy portal opens up for him to leave. The young man smiles and says he has one last task to finish before leaving the area. Then, he presses one of the red buttons on his special jacket. He says that from now on, it's time to put his companions through the grinder. The system then asks if he wants to start the automatic battle with the current team. As long as the loop is active, the rewards will continue to accumulate on their own. He then sends the powerful instructor back to his summon inventory. A green light appears, and the X-rank wind fairy is successfully summoned to the field. He tells the little creature that he's leaving the Monday dungeon farm to her. The young man explains that the master needs to train the others, and the fairy smiles at the idea. But a memory shows the little fairy struggling greatly with the instructor's intense training. The mage and the elf also struggle with the combat master's training methods. A giant hand grips the little fairy tightly in one of her memories. The little creature begs to do the loop instead, and the hero agrees to her request. With that, he decides to clear the rest of the dungeons and accumulate rewards there. While his other allies focus on training, he creates a perfect routine. The young man enters another portal, and the fairy panics about her new responsibility. Once on the other side, he turns around and realizes something strange is happening. The director greets him with a smile, and two employees bow respectfully. The young adventurer hands over the jacket and informs them that the entire recording is on it. The two thank him profusely, and the woman asks if he needs anything else. The woman assures him the footage won't be leaked to the press, so he can relax. But the young man says he doesn't care if the record becomes public, which shocks the woman. In return, he asks her to focus on protecting his family, as the country is a dangerous place. He says that since the company manages him, they should provide better security. The director agrees and says she will use all her influence to keep them safe. The scene changes to the little fairy being dragged by the giant gorilla against her will. In a new setting, a Komodo dragon consumes a giant slime creature. In Tuesday's dungeon, the total time was 3 minutes and 10 seconds. He thinks that he only used the Komodo for the recording, and that it's already a world record. The young man says that with runes and buffs, breaking records will be quite trivial for him. With a slight smirk, the young man turns off the recording equipment on his jacket. He and his lizard then head for the portal, and he says that Tuesday is over. Wednesday's dungeon is an icy place where one can obtain defense runes. The protagonist steps onto the snow and feels a freezing chill throughout his body. He shivers from the cold and complains that his movement speed is severely limited. The young man gets annoyed and says he's freezing solid in that icy place. With that, he summons a frost cat and a wind falcon to help with the mission. A titanium golem and a horned fairy are also summoned for the battle. He also summons the EX ranked draconic sorceress to complete the ice team. The frost cat roars, and the young man thinks that summons with resistance are essential. With his allies ready, he shivers from the cold, but seems very confident in his plan. He then looks out at the horizon and sees some ice creatures approaching from a distance. A horde of snow monsters furiously charges toward the group of heroes. Unfazed by the enemies, the young hero orders the titanium golem to advance. He commands the creature to amplify its shield to protect the entire team from the attack. Next, he asks the wind falcon to use its speed buff on everyone. With that, the bird lands on the golem's shoulder and grants it a blessing of agility. The team climbs onto the stone creature's hand and prepares for a quick transport. With the speed buff, the golem races like a bullet train through the dungeon snow. The speed is so intense that the young man and the sorceress get completely motion sick from the swaying. He covers his mouth and thinks that this is exciting, but it's making him really dizzy. Clinging to the stone giant, they press onward. Clearing the dungeon is for those who can endure the ride. The snow monsters continue the chase, but can't catch up to the group. The titanium golem glides through the snow, leaving all the enemies behind with ease. The young man smiles because the titanium golem is the perfect tank and never disappoints him. However, he says that's not all. As his stone ally approaches a cliff with a powerful punch, the creature smashes a hole in the wall of ice and rock. He explains that he can save time by taking a route only the golem can get through. Upon reaching the top of the cliff, he tells the fire sorceress to get ready to fight. The red-haired girl seems a little nervous, but is ready for action. The stone creature prepares to launch the group toward the big boss. With a swift motion, the golem hurls the team through the air like a projectile. The system announces that the boss has appeared, and the group faces the king of the snow monsters. The giant creature roars with fury, releasing an energy aura from its entire body. The young man then yells for the horned fairy to jump into action with her abilities. The small fairy floats above the monster and traps it with giant ice spikes. With the enemy immobilized, he orders the sorceress to attack with all her firepower. The mage unleashes a powerful wave of flames toward the trapped monster. Her fire dragon attack surges forward, burning everything in its path. The system announces that the boss has been defeated, and the area was cleared in 4 minutes. The young man celebrates the victory as his allies gather after the great battle. He's happy about another personal record, but is still feeling sick from the trip. Apparently, it wasn't motion sickness, but rather titanium golem sickness. The news of the new record spreads, and everyone wonders who back Jinwoo is. On the streets, people start talking about the mysterious new record holder. One woman recognizes the name and says, "He's the same guy who cleared the one on Tuesday." With that, the entirety of South Korea begins to focus its attention on the young adventurer. People remember he broke another player's record and are left in shock. In a cafe, two men are shocked to read the news about the new record on their phones. One of them reads in the newspaper that the player back, Jinwoo, appeared out of nowhere like a comet. The news reports show that the record for Monday's dungeon was broken by the rookie. On top of that, the records for Tuesday and Wednesday were also broken by the same young man. Everyone then wonders if he will also be able to conquer Thursday's dungeon. In his office, the director recognizes the name and remembers that Congressman Park had mentioned him. He was the young man who wanted summons in exchange for information, and his rival had objected. At the time, the rival said they shouldn't give him anything without getting the information first. But now, the old man realizes that the young man's information was completely true. With a sigh of regret, the man seems very disappointed with his decision. He remembers the argument and that his rival had a good point. But what matters are the results. The director celebrates his high popularity in the polls because the outcome was good. He thinks that if he had supported the young man, he would have gained even more votes from the people. With that, he says his rival has lost her touch and threw away a huge opportunity. The man then calls his secretary to give him a new, important order. He tells the employee to contact the player back Jinwoo, and the young man is shocked. The boss says they thought he was a fake, but now they need to bring him back. The scene then shifts to the other politician, who freaks out when he hears the latest news. The Monday and Wednesday dungeons are the ones that give runes to top players. Meanwhile, the dungeon that takes place on Tuesday provides abrasives for equipment. With that, the scene shifts to our adventurous hero's next big challenge. He and his instructor arrive in a rocky desert for the new dungeon of the day. The system announces that Thursday's dungeon awards skill books as a prize. However, these books do not contain unique skills for players' summons. Even so, they're still worth it because they grant other very useful skills. Thanks to this, they no longer need to go to the Sunday dungeon to get the books. Thursdays is much easier and doesn't even serve as a warm-up for them. Because of this, they don't repeat the same thing and can now rest on Sundays. But the easy Thursday dungeon begins with several flashing danger warnings. A boss monster appears on sight as soon as the protagonist enters the portal. This dungeon's boss has an absurdly high and very powerful defense. Because of this, the standard strategy is to use several wolves to attack the giant monster. But the young hero smirks, as he has a much better plan to deal with the enemy. He then summons his entire elite team for the great battle that's about to begin. With that, his titanium golem moves forward and readies a powerful punch for the enemy. The stone creature attacks with all its might and shatters the monster's defense. The instructor says that defense doesn't matter if the attack damage is extreme enough. He thinks with a smile that he can't sell a video like this as a guide. It'd be like a recipe that tells you to grab some EX rank summons from the fridge. With that, the young man decides he'll just tell people to use the wolf and a strong team. But he thinks that there is one trick, and the secret lies with his titanium golem. The strategy is to hit the weak spot located on the earth golem's head, and that's why he uses his titanium golem to reach the boss's weak spot. The fairy and the falcon also prepare to provide support for the coordinated attack. The adventurer then points and gives the order for the dragon and the instructor to attack. He yells for all of his allies to aim directly for the enemy's head. The stone golem lands a powerful punch, and the instructor follows up with his sword. Their combined attack breaks through the monster's defense, leaving it stunned. The warrior lands on the ground as the earth golem cries out in pain from the blow. The creature slowly crumbles apart, and the master prepares for the next attack. The fire sorceress concentrates her energy and prepares for the final blow. With her eyes glowing, She unleashes all of her magical power at once. A massive dragon of flames surges toward the weakened monster. The creature is engulfed in fire, and its body begins to burn intensely. The earth monster is completely obliterated by the mage's devastating attack. The system announces that the boss has been eliminated, and the time was 5 minutes and 10 seconds. With a victorious smile, the young man says they shaved a minute off the Korean record. He looks at his warrior and thinks that the instructor is definitely very strong, but the young man doesn't plan to use his master as a unit for this target dungeon. With a thoughtful look, he says that just one well-raised dragon is enough. The mage smiles proudly, knowing that the high-level dungeons will be a piece of cake. The young man praises the girl and says the clear time will be just 10 seconds. The instructor watches with the little fairy on his shoulder and seems quite satisfied with the team. He then says it's time to head to the next dungeon of the day. Once again, with that, the hero heads for the blue portal, and a man calls out to talk to him. The young man turns around, and the man asks if he is the famous player Baek Jin-woo. He confirms his identity, and two men in suits formally introduce themselves. They say they're from the director's office, and hand the young man a card. He takes the card, and the men apologize for the sudden approach. The hero asks what they want. As things should have already been settled, one of the men explains that they reviewed the proposal he made last time. They then say that now that he has shown results, they are considering it. However, the young man smiles and tells them to forget it, as he's no longer interested. The two men are shocked by his response and don't know what to do now. The young man scoffs at their results review and thinks of the director who believed in him. The woman is an angel who gave him 1,300 million without batting an eye. He gets annoyed with their attitude, as it's the complete opposite of his new director. One of the employees starts to speak, but the young hero cuts him off immediately. He points to the side and informs them that he recently signed with a company. With a smile, he says goodbye, and the men are confused by the agency's name. One of them asks his senior what the YB agency is, and he doesn't know either. He wonders if the Ujai he mentioned is from the famous Daejeon group. With a worried look, he tells his colleague that they need to look into it. He feels like he just lost a massive opportunity because of a bad decision. At that moment, the young man receives some strange messages from his former boss. The scene changes to a large building in the middle of the city, and the hero is on the roof. Alone, he observes the city and seems to be looking for a good spot. He smiles and says that this place should work for what he has in mind. Friday's dungeon requires the player to run through it personally to clear it, and so the hero decides it's time to start practicing his skills. With that, a B rank Sky Wyvern is summoned to help the young man with his training. With a focused look, he prepares for his first flying lesson with the creature. He thinks that thanks to the shield, he won't fall off, but the height is still terrifying. The young man calls his new winged ally closer, and the dragon answers the call. Carefully, the young man approaches the creature and affectionately pats its head. He asks if the dragon is ready and prepares to climb onto its back. With that, they fly toward the East Sea to find a safer location. Suddenly, he opens his eyes, surprised by the sensation of flying through the skies. He is amazed by the view of the city from above and the adrenaline of the flight. With an excited smile, the young man realizes this is more fun than he thought. With that, he gets pumped up and tells the dragon to go all out toward their destination. They arrive at the coast of Yanjiang and land on a deserted, isolated beach. His allies are already there, and the instructor praises the master's quick adaptation. The young man feels a bit embarrassed by the compliment, but thanks his companion. The mage recalls it was a nightmare when they learned to ride wyverns. As expected, the master is truly amazing, and the mage blushes with admiration. He thanks her awkwardly, and the instructor gets jealous of the attention he's receiving. Anyway, the young man says the next training is with the sky dolphin. The warrior confirms, and the young man says that learning from them is the fastest way. With that, the two get excited and say they'll do their best to teach the master. A few days later, the young man is in front of the portal for Friday's dungeon. With a confident smile, he prepares for the new challenge that awaits him. This is the dungeon that grants special runes. and is the place for the god of attack. He summons the Wind Falcon and asks the creature to give him a speed buff. With that, the bird releases a bluish aura and strengthens its master for the race. The young man gets into position at the starting line as the countdown begins. The race will start in 10 seconds, and he needs to reach the destination as fast as possible. With a focused gaze, he concentrates so as not to lose a single precious second. The countdown ends, and the young man shoots off at high speed through the obstacle course. With the falcon's buff, he runs faster than the wind and pushes forward with everything he's got. He dodges some projectiles that are fired in his direction on the track. With a punch, he destroys one of the obstacles that suddenly appears in his path. He thinks that now that he's doing it himself, he can understand the feeling. The young man jumps and skillfully dodges the obstacles that appear on the ground. With a smile, he says this is way more exciting than using a controller. Now he says it's time to enter the dungeon's first secret route. The normal path would be to cross the water and keep running straight ahead. But the young hero has a different plan and jumps toward the large sea. Suddenly, he summons his sea rank sky dolphin to help him with the crossing. The marine creature emerges from the water, and the young man prepares for the next step. Giving the dolphin a tight hug, he dives into the depths of the ocean. By doing this, he can avoid all the obstacles that are on the surface. The young man then emerges from the water and calls his wyvern for the final phase of the race. The dolphin launches him into the air, and the young man prepares to switch mounts. From there, it's time to fly, and he lands perfectly on the dragon's back. With that, he can simply fly over the rest of the obstacles on the course. He approaches the finish line with a victorious smile on his face. The system announces that the dungeon has been completed, and the time was 2 minutes. With that, he breaks South Korea's record once again without any difficulty. A shower of confetti falls, and he celebrates his achievement with a peace sign. The scene then shifts to the politician's office, where he is in a tense meeting. The man tells his rival that she has 24 hours to resign. He shows her the article about Jinwoo's records, and the rival is shocked by the news. With a smirk, the politician says that if she doesn't leave, he will sue her. At that moment, one of his employees rushes into the room with some news. The man announces that the record for Friday's dungeon was also broken by Jinwoo.